Hi, I'm Benjamin Altshuler, and I'm here in Toronto as part of the Classics Conclave, American Philological Association Oral History Project. Today I'm speaking with Professor Elaine Fantham, Geiger Professor Emerita of Latin at Princeton University. Professor Fantham is the grande dame of Latin studies, and is widely considered by her learned peers to be one of the great Latinists of all time. An expert in Latin literature ranging from comedy to epic poetry and rhetoric, much of Professor Fantham's work concerns the intricacies of Greek and Roman literature and history, with particular important contributions in the fields of religion and the social history of Roman women. Professor Fantham, for my first question, how do you like to engage students in the classroom? How do you make the books that you're reading relevant and exciting?
Well, you probably have learnt Latin as language and literature. I don't know whether you've studied Roman history in school. Probably you have. Yeah, because I just used social history, Roman social history, because I'm extremely interested in it. And in fact, I'll show you a book I'm quite proud of, even though I only wrote 1/5 of the book. It's called Women in the Classical World, Image and Text. And 5 of us got together on this, 3 Greeks and 2 Romans. And my fellow Roman, a lovely woman who's just died of cancer, Natalie Boimel-Campen, wrote fascinating books about ordinary women, not princesses, in Roman society, and about the representation of the Roman family, for instance. And you learn so much that's of consuming interest if you can include social history. But you know, my textbooks at school were intended for boys, because they all were then. We're talking 1940s. And I mean, the pronoun was he, and the interest was military, obviously. And I used to get rather fretful about this. I thought, you know, we're good enough to study this. How come nobody ever notices we're there? And recent textbooks have changed radically in that respect. They're much more inclusive. The very first time I got the idea that the classical world must have been rather marvelous was when I saw an advertisement for Sanatogen tonic wine. And this advertisement showed a godlike young man with a handsome, nice-looking young woman in a chariot. He had his arm round her, with one arm round her, and the other arm was holding the reins. And they were driving past the Acropolis. Now, this doesn't correspond to anything that I believe ever happened in Athenian history, but it certainly caught my imagination. And obviously, I mean, it was partly because it was inclusive, because this young woman was allowed to be in the chariot, unlike Saudi Arabian women. And then I didn't seriously return to thinking about women until I was reading Euripides.
If you were to live in any period in antiquity or experience a day in the past, when would it be?
A bit of a problem if you're a woman. You say antiquity, so let's stay with antiquity. Probably the 2nd century AD, provided one was upper class, financially, you know, privileged. 2nd century AD was pretty stable. There were no horrible dynastic murders and things.
You've worked with National Public Radio on classical subjects. How important is it for the general public to gain familiarity with Greek and Latin literature and history?
Well, it's important for people to get as much historical depth as they can. But you see, if you come from Europe, you regard this as your own history. I mean, even though, in fact, the rest of Europe was occupied by the Nazis when I was at school, and so I couldn't go to France, let alone Italy, which in any case was being ruled by an Italian fascist. Even though Europe was cut off from us in that respect, I felt European. In fact, I was one of the generation that wanted to see the European Union. I thought being British was not enough. We were isolated and, if anything, a little bit retarded. We got our Renaissances and our Reformations a little later than other countries. And it was a product of geography. Now, it's different if you grow up on this continent. I mean, why should they really feel any connection with Europe? It's true that as soon as they look at Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, they discover men who acquired a marvelous education and breadth of knowledge, partly by commuting to Paris, for instance. And was it Franklin who was the ambassador?
Yes.
Yes. But it's harder to make the case to a Canadian or an American that they ought to know about the Greeks and Romans.
If you could broadcast a message to all the classicists in the world, what would you say to them as words of wisdom or warnings?
Well, the only warning would be don't expect it to earn you a living unless you're very good. I think if you're good enough, you can still get a living. What was it, wisdom and warning? Yeah. Wisdom. I don't think I have any wisdom. But I would simply, I suppose, say, always explore anything that turns up on the horizon that interests you.